Hello, I'm Jenya DeLima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the author-focused podcast that takes a whole person approach to everything related to both writing and editing. Authors may have heard or read that to land a publishing deal or to successfully self-publish, that they need to have a large social media following and an established platform. But is that really true? Cultural researcher, writer, and storyteller Annie Sklaver Orenstein is here to tell you that there are other methods, and she'll be sharing how to sell your book without having that large following or platform. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. Could you tell us a little bit about you and maybe your most recent book?
Yes. So, as you mentioned, I'm a researcher by trade, and I work during the day as a researcher in a large tech company.
Mm.
And I write, obviously, and I love to write. And I had this idea for a book, which is my book that came out in May. It's called Always a Sibling: The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief. And it is kind of exactly what the title sounds like, but it's a book on grief and specifically around sibling grief. I lost my eldest brother in 2009. He was
Oh,
killed
so
in
sorry.
Afghanistan. Thank you. And originally, the first idea I had for this book was very much about him and told in part through his own words because he left a lot of journals and diaries behind, but kind of a story of both of us. And I had this idea, and of course, everything you look at online is like you need to have a huge social media following or a name. You have to be able to, have a platform prove that you can sell this book.
Right. Yeah.
And at the time, I had a private Instagram account that was like photos of my kids.
Mhm.
And basically that was it. And I had a Facebook account and a Twitter account that no one followed. And I really started to wonder, like, how true this was.
Mhm.
And it felt to me like I was working full time. I had two young kids, and it was the pandemic. And, this was like 2020. So time was extremely limited.
Mhm.
And it was like, okay, I can either write this book or try to build a platform and a following. But I didn't really feel like I had the time or brain space to do both.
Right.
And so I felt like rather than reject myself, and say, I have to go do this other thing, which is totally different than what I wanted to do, I kind of took the approach of like, well, I'm going to make someone tell me that. I'm going to make someone tell me that I have to go build some kind of platform.
Mhm.
And so I really just pursued the book and ignored the platform. And I had, put together a proposal and I was querying agents.
Mhm.
And, I sent out, I don't know how many queries and didn't hear back from anyone ever. Well, not ever, but didn't hear back from anyone for a while. Then I had read that, a helpful, if you can get like essays published or articles
Oh.
published or something like that, then it's a good reason to follow up with an agent because you can say, oh, hey, by the way, I had this piece published. So I thought, okay, that's going to be my focus. Again, let me focus on writing and like the
Mhm.
thing I want to sell and not building a platform.
Right.
So, because, my brother was killed in Afghanistan and was in the military, I wrote a piece about that and about him and pitched it first for Memorial Day, but I pitched it like in early May, not realizing how far in advance you have to pitch for holidays like
Yes.
that. And so then I made a few changes and I pitched it for Veterans Day and I started pitching much earlier than November. And it ended up running in time. And so
Which is
that was like a
amazing. So
big, yeah,
congratulations.
thank you. That it was huge. And that was my moment to follow up and I did. And I ended up hearing back from two agents and signing with one of them. And, my question to her was like, okay, now do I need to build a platform? And she kind of took the same approach as me and was like, well, let's make someone tell us that you need a platform, and she felt like in my case, right, we could position me as a researcher and do these things. And there were some changes that she wanted to make to the book, and I was okay with. But we really felt like there are other things to lean on. There are things like professional expertise, there
Mhm.
is personal knowledge, there's just the quality of writing, right? And in her mind, we could go out with that and we could tell publishers, hey, we'll work on building a platform while writing the book and help when it comes out, but let's just try to sell this book.
Right.
And the first time we went out on submission, we got all rejections, as often happens, but very consistent feedback.
Mhm.
And from some editors, feedback that was like, if you make these changes, come back. Feel free to pitch us again. So rewrote the proposal again at that point for the third time and went out, and the book ended up going to auction. And I had three editors, three publishers
Mhm.
bidding on it.
Which is the
And
dream,
again,
really.
right, exactly. And again, at that point, I had a private Instagram account.
Yeah.
And I had no following and I had no platform, but I had other stuff. And I did, start to build that platform before the book comes out. And I'm, trucking along at like 1,000 followers. And maybe it'll grow, maybe it won't. But I think ultimately it was like the book filled a hole. It
Mhm.
filled a need in the market. There was a real white space. And I think the editors liked the quality of the writing, and ultimately the lack of a platform was something they could kind of look past. And
Right.
what I think I've realized since then is, having a platform might help you sell a book. When you think about like celebrities who maybe aren't very good at writing, but like they can sell a book and then they get assigned a ghostwriter, and it's fine because they know they're going to sell a lot. They have a lot of followers, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if you have a huge platform, it could certainly help you sell a book. But in my experience, not having a platform doesn't hurt you. It just isn't necessarily the thing that's going to sell the book. But I don't think that it ultimately was a thing against me. It just wasn't the reason why I was able to sell the book.
Yeah, it could even differ depending on what you're writing into. So, just as a personal example, if I'm scrolling Bookstagram and something catches my eye, I might then go add it to my TBR or my Amazon wish list. But I'm thinking about a book like yours where someone is already in that mindset of, I need help dealing with this grief. They're not going to be scrolling through Book Talk or Bookstagram, just mindlessly scrolling. They're going
Right.
to be looking that up in a search engine or going to that aisle in the bookstore. You're not going to be looking up that author platform ahead of time because you don't even know to do it. You're thinking about the content, not the author so much.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think, when I went out and had in my proposal, there's no modern resource for grieving siblings. And here's the statistics on,
Mhm.
how many grieving siblings there are. And I heard back from some publishers where they said, like, we didn't believe you until we searched and realized, oh my God, there aren't any. And this is a
Wow.
hole. And part of me was like, are you kidding me? This is what you do for a job.
I'll admit
How
that
did you
I
not
do
know?
that. Yes, I mean that's surprising because yeah, even with a lot of the authors that I work with, that's something that we do, or we ask them to do the research and present it, not
Hmm.
just, oh, what a surprise.
Right, right. So, I think kind of making that case, they were like, yeah, there is an audience for that.
Mhm.
I think I was able to prove that there was an audience for the book. And the fact that that whole audience didn't follow me on Instagram was okay,
Right.
because they exist, and there will unfortunately be more of that audience who exist every day. And I think it really helped build the case. And again, it could be different with different genres, but I think it really felt like this is a missing resource and I can fill that gap. And so the fact that I didn't have, thousands of followers was okay.
Mhm. So, why do you think that this myth is so largely believed? Because we do see that come up a lot, even in author discussions, where a lot of their focus is, oh, I have to get a social media account. I have to build this huge following. And they just act like it's this given, that it's a
Hmm.
necessity almost.
I've been thinking about that a lot and like wondering where it comes from and wondering, is it partly a self-fulfilling prophecy where like someone gave that advice and then enough people have repeated it where it kind of becomes canon?
Like an urban legend almost.
Right, right. So I have three theories that are strictly theories, but one is that it's like urban legend. One is that it can help you, right? Like it's not going to hurt to have a following.
Right.
So maybe there's like that piece of it and that kind of thing where it like starts off as like an optional nice to have can very quickly turn into this is a thing we all must do, right?
Yes.
And so like there's that. And then I also kind of wonder like I don't know, are there editors who are using that as an excuse when really the book just wasn't right for them?
Hmm.
And I don't know, I got a lot of rejections and it seemed like the rejections I got were thoughtful in terms of like here's why the content doesn't work or whatever. But I do wonder if it's a little bit of a lazy excuse where the publisher doesn't want to put in all the work or they want to know that it's more of a guaranteed thing. It's
Hmm.
easier for them if you have a bigger marketing platform. So I don't know how much of it like comes from that being an easy excuse to give an author, but it feels like kind of a lazy one to me because I think if it's a good book, then the audience can be found.
Right. Well, plus you want to think that your publisher is going to back it and that they're going to help promote it for you, not rely
Exactly.
on you and the audience that you bring to them versus the other way around.
Exactly. That's why it feels kind of lazy to me.
Hmm.
Um, but it does feel like just one more thing that they put on the author
Right.
to do that really like traditionally was the role of the publisher, but
Mhm.
maybe it's a cost reduction thing, but it makes their life easier. And I think there are some publishers or some editors who are looking for that. If their budgets are really limited, maybe it's easier to find a book that they don't have to put as many marketing dollars behind.
Yeah. And then some small presses don't have a separate marketing team at all. So then there's
Right,
that too.
right.
Well, can you share what you think authors lose or maybe miss out on when they're focused only on the number of followers they have?
Well, I mean, they're not spending that time writing. And I think there's also a trap of like quantity over quality, right? Like I could try to just build the biggest social media following I can, but in my case, if the book isn't relevant to them, I don't know why that would be helpful. And there's word of mouth, sure, and all publicity is good publicity, but like for me, it felt like, and I appreciate that I know your podcast kind of takes this angle of like writing as part of your full life and kind of this like the balance and taking care of yourself and all of that. And for me, I just felt like I couldn't do both. Building a
Yeah.
following on social media requires not only a tremendous amount of time, but it does require creative energy because you have to create content. You have to build something and create something from scratch that reflects you and that has your words and your all of this. And I kind of felt like if I was channeling all of this creative energy and time into that, then when was I going to actually sit down and write? Some days it's easier to create content than to write, and other days I would be sitting there like zero content ideas, just wanting to write. And
Hmm.
so it felt like a chore, and I didn't want it to feel like a chore. And I think that ultimately we only have a certain number of hours in the day. A lot of us are writing in addition to a full time job,
Hmm.
in addition to other life responsibilities, and your time is precious. And so I think, my advice would be like, don't spend so much time trying to build your following that you don't get to write your book or that you don't have that good creative energy left for it.
Yes, exactly. That's very similar to what Stephen James said when he was on the show because he has a character he's written about who admittedly is not a great author in this book. But the character's focus is on building his social media presence and debating which platform he should use. And I think he said then, like, hey, focus on the writing, get the book done, then maybe worry about it, not the other way
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about it like, okay, I don't know if anyone else listening has like a day job where you have to build out PowerPoint presentations or like slides and stuff, but I always get in the trap when I'm writing my research reports where like I can spend so long designing my slides and making my deck look beautiful.
Mhm.
It's just because I want to avoid writing the actual research, right? It's a fully a procrastination tactic. It's my ADHD full force. Let me make sure my color palette and design is perfect. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I didn't actually write the report. And it's a distraction. It's a very pretty distraction. And I think that sometimes creating content and this focus on building a platform is that it's like a shiny, exciting thing. You get a lot more dopamine hits because every time you get a
Yeah.
new follower, you're like, this is exciting. Whereas when you're writing, you're like alone in a hole. I mean, I literally write like with my hood on
Yep.
and like and I'm so focused in and you're just like just sucking from you. And that's very different than the kind of immediate reward and payoff you get from social media. And so it's really easy to focus on social media instead because it feels better. You get more of a payoff, you get more immediate payoff.
Well, besides not writing, do you think there are any other negatives that come with focusing on social media metrics?
Oh, yes. I think that it's very easy to tie your worth and your value and your skill to your number of followers.
Mhm.
If I post an excerpt from the book that only gets 5 likes, then like, am I a bad writer? Am I a bad author? Like,
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of negative and downside to it. Like, what if the people on Book Talk aren't talking about my book? Like, I think there's a lot there, and yet the reactions that you're getting and the numbers, like, you have no idea who these people are,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And I think you end up tying a lot of, at least for me, I end up tying a lot of my own like self-worth or self-esteem to these numbers that are anonymous people. I think they're people and not bots, but like, it just, you miss, I think, the essence of it. And for me, I get very trapped in like self-doubt. I try not to look at those numbers now, or at least not immediately. But like I would post and then, look 10 minutes later, look 20 minutes later. Like,
Yes.
is anyone looking at it? And like, I need to stop, but it's really hard. And I think, we were talking earlier about how it can kind of suck some of that creativity and like it can take some of that confidence.
Yeah.
And if you start kind of focusing on what performs well on social media, it may or may not translate to what's going to perform well in your book and in your
Oh,
story,
good.
like,
Yes.
so maybe I'm so focused on that quick hit of like what delivers on Instagram,
Yep.
but then that might not work in a book, it probably
Exactly.
won't. And so now I've like really honed this skill that isn't actually going to help me write a book.
Mm-hmm. Just you saying that made me start thinking about my best performing posts and thinking, could you even make a story from those? And I think
Right.
one was like a giant pile of boxes before a book convention. And then the next one after that was a picture of my dog on his birthday. So yeah, we're not exactly looking at great starts for
Right.
literature here, but yeah.
Right. And I think it's like ultimately it's a helpful tool for selling books and it's a helpful tool for building communities.
Mhm.
I think like
Oh
really
yeah.
beautiful communities can be built online. But I think when you start to feel like I need to do this in order to sell a book, I need to do this in order to do something, then it becomes that chore and it
Yeah.
becomes negative and it becomes pressure.
It could also
Whereas
be very limiting.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, like, even how you were talking about the essays and getting published in time of all things. What if you are foregoing these other opportunities because you are putting all your focus there? I mean, I'd
Hmm.
rather be able to say I had a piece in time than I have 15,000 followers.
Right. And like, I didn't really get many followers from that article. Like, it wasn't like I suddenly like got thousands of followers. I didn't. I got like a few trickled in, but that wasn't the point. Actually, no. When the first I've published two in time. One was around when the book launched. And the first time I published in time, I didn't have a public Instagram at all. But the second time, just a few trickled in, but like that wasn't the point of it, right? The point wasn't, I didn't do it to get followers. I did it to publish a piece in time and to get the attention of agents and to like do all of these other things. You have to know why you're doing it, right? And
Yes,
like if you're on social media because you want to build a community, that's great. That's like an incredible thing, right? And you can get a lot of fulfillment from that. But if you're just doing it because you think you have to, then I don't think that's the right reason.
yeah, very well said. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So, besides talking about publishing essays and that sort of thing, what other methods have you seen work or have you heard from other authors that work besides the whole social media thing?
I think, yeah, getting your work out there, however you do it, publish it yourself on Medium or have a like just getting your work out there. And I say that because in my experience, so when I followed up with agents after my essay came out, the agent I ended up signing with had come back to me and said, I loved your writing in the timepiece. It's different than the style of your writing in the proposal. Would you be willing to shift the proposal and make it more personal like the time essay was?
Mm,
Now, if she had never read the time essay, she wouldn't have known that I could do that, right? The
that's
original
true.
proposal was a bit more like I wasn't in it. It was much more about my brother. And the time essay was very personal. And she said, I want that. I want the book version of that. And if my writing wasn't out there, she would never have known. And so I don't even think it's necessarily that it has to be in time or it has to be in some big place. You just have to have examples of your work for agents and editors to look at because they might say, hey, can we do these few things and change this thing up? And I know you can do it because I've seen your work. And so I think that's like my biggest piece of advice is just get the work out there somewhere so that you can point people to it. And like you hear stories of like if you get published in Modern Love, then like agents come knocking on your door and like that's great. I've never been accepted to Modern Love. But but like I think just having your work out there is really important. And I do think that's one where social media can't necessarily do the same thing because you're writing such small snippets. So maybe it can, I don't know. But for me, at least, having something slightly longer was really helpful. So I would say do that, put your work out there so that if there is someone interested in you, they can see the breadth of what you can do and they can see your style and they can really get a sense of it. And then, yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest one. But it goes back to that like, if you want to be a writer, then write and
Mhm.
share that, share your writing, share the thing that you ultimately want to do, and let that be your focus.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And do you have any upcoming events or books, maybe other pieces that you'd like to tell people about before we end?
Well, I am working on some things, but nothing new yet. But if you are a bereaved sibling or you know one or you are supporting one, consider picking up Always a Sibling, The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief.
All right. Well, thank you again. It's been so great having you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Yep. Thank you for listening and be sure to check out the show notes for additional information. And please join me next week when Paula Wyman will be here to tell us all about the importance of taking that first small step to help you get started. Thanks again.